Much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you and your families for being here today. One question for all of you. Raise your hand if you've ever been a judge. Mr. Brindisi, you're the only one on the panel that has ever served as a judge. So let me come to you, because we hear a lot about two tiers of justice, that there are some people, some families, some groups that think that they deserve one type treatment, and there are others that get a different type of treatment. So as you look at this issue of people beginning to doubt the court, that there is equal treatment and equal justice. So how do you approach that? And people that think that there are some that get favoritism?
Good morning, Senator. I can tell you that in my court, and I have a very large pro se docket in the court that I serve in, it's important to me to make sure everyone understands that comes before the court that I have the pleasure of serving in, that they are going to get equal treatment regardless of their background.
On the bench, are you a politician or a judge?
I am a judge, Senator.
Okay. I know you've had, let me talk to you about a bill that you had while you were a state legislator. You co-sponsored the New York State DREAM Act. Do you remember that?
I do recall that.
Okay, and it was a bill that allowed illegal aliens to receive taxpayer-funded scholarships for college, and Governor Cuomo ultimately signed it in 2019, correct?
I was, I'm not sure of the status of the bill since I've left the legislature.
It was signed in 2019, and you co-sponsored it back in 2015, correct?
That sounds correct, Senator.
Okay, do you still support forcing U.S. taxpayers to pay for scholarships for those that have broken the law and have entered the country illegally?
Senator, it's been a number of years since I sponsored that legislation, and I do want to stress—
Do you still support it? I've got 2 minutes left.
I'll try to be quick. At that point, as a policymaker, I can give you my reasonings for supporting the bill at that time.
Submit that in writing.
I will do.
Do you still support it?
I can submit it in writing.
Okay, just yes or no. I still support that, or no, I don't.
Senator, as a sitting judge
Okay.
and a judicial nominee.
Well, no, this plays into it. And this is why it's so important for us to get these answers from you all. We've got 5 of you that have never been a judge. You're going to get a lifetime appointment. People are so frustrated with going to court and feeling like they're before a politician, or feeling that there are 2 tiers of justice, or feeling that people that don't deserve something are getting it. And this is not a partisan issue. It is an issue that people bring to us. Let me talk to you a moment about your legal experience. And I looked at your record, and by my count, as a practicing attorney, you had no experience with criminal matters. Is that accurate?
Senator, as a practicing attorney, as a policymaker, and now as a judge, I've had lots of experience with criminal matters over the years in the court that I sit in now.
Okay, but you've only presided over civil trials, right?
That is correct. However,
Okay.
the trials—
Well, looking at the significant number of criminal cases that are on a district judge's docket, how can you assure us that you're going to be prepared to do this job and not be in training school for the first couple of years?
Senator, as a judge now, I preside over matters involving alleged false arrest, which require me to evaluate probable cause, which is something I would have to do as a district court judge. I preside over several matters involving—
Okay, my time's about to run out, and I want to move on. I know that Senator Graham and Senator Lee each asked you about the Equality Act, and you were a co-sponsor, an original co-sponsor of the Equality Act when you were in Congress, correct?
I believe that's correct, Senator.
Okay. I'm going to quote from the Equality Act, and I'm quoting, "An individual shall not be denied access to a shared facility, including a restroom, locker room, dressing room, that is in accordance with the individual's gender identity," end quote. In other words, under this bill that you not only co-sponsored, you voted for it, the women of America could no longer expect that they would have single-sex locker rooms, they would have multi-stall bathrooms, or jails. That would be taken away under the version of the bill that you co-sponsored and you're voting for. So with all of that in mind, are you comfortable with your vote on the Equality Act, or would you revisit that?
Senator, it's been a number of years since I sponsored that legislation, and I do understand there is a...
Simple yes or no. Do women deserve that privacy, or do they not, in your opinion?
Senator, as a sitting court judge in state court right now and as a district
Yes or
court
no?
nominee,
The answer is no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just weeks before the election, the Biden administration...
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And to each of you, thank you for being here. And Senator Klobuchar is, pardon me, concerned about rail access in the middle of the country. I want to talk about that potential passenger rail route from Atlanta, Chattanooga, Nashville, Memphis. And I would like to hear a verbal response from each of you that if confirmed, you would continue to work on a self-sustaining and efficient railway for passengers in these communities. Start at one end of the dais and work down.
Chairman Cantwell, Senator Blackburn, yes, I will.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Blackburn.
Yes.
Ditto. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Capozzi, I know that Senator Welch asked you about our Baby Changing on Board Act. And knowing that you have worked with Americans with disabilities, I would like to know that you're going to support this legislation, because some of these train routes take a while, like Memphis to New Orleans can take over 9 hours. And of course, babies have to be changed regularly. So is this the type of legislation that you're willing to support?
Thank you for the question, Senator Blackburn. Yes, and as I said earlier, I understand certainly the need for accessible baby changing tables. As the father of triplets, our kids are now much older, but I still remember those days fondly. The point that I made to Senator Welch was that it's important to ensure that accessibility isn't compromised, because space is at a premium in the accessible bathroom. So I think technical assistance will be critical to ensure that they're installed properly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Latham, I want to come to you. I know that Senator Schmidt asked you about your trips to Venezuela in 2009, 2011. Have you made any additional trips into Venezuela?
No.
No, okay. And I know that you have been quoted in articles as calling Chavez a nice guy and very benevolent. And you said or indicated you did not remember making those statements. Do you have any clarification on that?
No.
You don't? Okay, we will get you those statements so that you can provide in writing an appropriate response. Mr. Chavez arrested dissidents and said that he was a self-avowed enemy of the United States. Are you aware of that? And do you agree with his statement?
No.
You do not, okay. Mr. Chavez nationalized and effectively decimated the entire transportation system in Venezuela. So do you share Mr. Chavez's views toward transportation, that government bureaucrats should exert more control over the industry?
No.
Okay. Let me ask you about your previous involvement with the Delaware River and Bay Authority, which was rife with corruption and scandal during your service. After the agency spent more than $1 million on trips and entertainment over a 3-year period, the board adopted policies to bring some fiscal responsibility to the organization. You reportedly claimed and complained about the charges, and you were upset that you would, and I'm going to quote you, that you would have to fly coach overseas, end quote. At Amtrak, as budgetary losses piled up in 2022, executives earned over $2 million in bonuses. And Senator Fisher brought this up with you all. And I would like to know, Mr. Latham, given your past comments on using taxpayer funds to have a life of luxury, how can we trust you to bring fiscal responsibility and transparency to Amtrak?
I've never taken any trips with the DRBA, and I've never justified what happened while I was on the board when I began. As a matter of fact, the reason the governor appointed me to the board was to correct some of those violations that were going on. And we were able to do that. We changed policy. We put in a...
So why did you complain about the changes?
I don't remember complaining about the changes. Matter of fact, I was part of help making the changes.
We'll submit that reporting to you so you can respond in writing. I would like to have some clarity on that. We're very concerned about the losses at Amtrak, so we will do that. Let me ask you this. Do you have experience in the rail industry in your background?
In the rail industry? No.
Yes, sir.
No.
You have no experience.
Not in the rail industry, no.
Is there anyone else on the panel that has no rail experience in their background?
I have transportation experience.
Any other member of the panel? Is any other member lacking rail experience? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Moran, did you have a second round that you were interested?
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you all. Judge Wise, I do want to start with you. We've talked some about Girls, Inc. this morning, and I know that you had said in response to Senator Lee that the statement he was referring was sent out or on the website of the national organization and not Alameda County. So I went to Alameda County, and their website says, and I'm quoting, girls refers to gender expansive youth. Cis girls, trans girls, non-binary youth, gender non-conforming youth, gender queer youth, and any girl identified youth, end quote. So since you were a member of that group for years and supported them, is it fair to assume that that is also your definition of girl?
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
And I apologize, I certainly didn't mean to misspeak when it came to what Senator Lee had asked. Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with those statements.
But
and
I've never familiar with Alameda County, and that's what I'm asking for your response. Is your definition of girl the same as Alameda County has on their website, their Girls, Inc. website?
I have not thought about a definition of girl in that way before. So I don't think those are the words that I would...
definition of girl and woman. What's your definition?
I think certainly as I was raised, and I have believed that generally speaking for nearly all of us, the sex that we are assigned at birth by the doctor is what we are, and it's okay. I think that applies appropriately to the majority.
Let me move on because I want to talk to you about the group's stance on Title IX. And in 2022, the National Girls, Inc. organization sent a letter to Secretary Cardona, urging him to issue rules regarding sex equity in athletics, including transgender students' participation in school sports, so that student athletes are protected from discrimination. And I'm quoting that from the letter. So do you agree that the Department of Education should issue a rule on sex equity for student athletes?
I have no opinion about that, Senator Blackburn.
Okay, well.
I will say I don't ascribe to the particular statements that you were saying. I have not read them, I have not seen them, and it's not something that I would advocate. And as a sitting judge who hears, I have more than 15,000 cases on my docket right now. These types of issues potentially could come before me.
Of course they're going to come before you, and it's important to know where you stand, and it's important to know Title IX is under attack, and we have witnessed that. And I represent Tennessee. I hear from women, I hear from female athletes all the time about their concerns on that. So is there ever a situation in which it's appropriate for a biological male to compete in women's sporting events? Because you say you believe our sex is what it is assigned at birth. So should a biological male be allowed to compete against a biological female?
Again, Senator Blackburn, I don't have a personal opinion about that because I think those things are regulated by sporting agencies and organizations. I really don't. I sincerely have no view about that.
Okay, let's talk about your Think Outside the Prison article that you wrote in 2021. It was published in the Daily Journal. You made some interesting contentions in that article, and I want to ask you about those. You said, and I'm quoting, "Over the last decade, judges have had fewer practical or effective options for the placement of individuals who regularly find themselves mired in the criminal justice system." End quote. When you say, and I'm quoting again, "find themselves mired in the criminal justice system," that seems to suggest that individuals who have committed criminal acts have simply ended up in the criminal justice system by happenstance rather than as a direct result of their actions. So do you think individuals who have committed violent crime, that they deserve to face consequences for those actions?
Senator Blackburn, I don't think that you were here earlier when I spoke, but even when I gave my opening remarks,
No, I was watching.
I'm actually very glad that you asked me that because I absolutely believe that people need to take responsibility for their personal actions and that we need to hold people accountable for violating the law. The safety and security of our country, I think, is deeply rooted in that.
What would push you to do an article like Think Outside the Prison?
May I respond?
Of course.
That article specifically was focused on, because there has been bipartisan support, I think, to reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. And judges have a lot of people who come through the system repeatedly who are mentally ill or drug addicted. And it was raising the issue that it was very important that judges either needed to have people who have committed crimes, they need to either be able to go to prison where there's a place to put them, or they have to be able to go to a facility for treatment or mental health. And if none of those are available, we have some serious consequences, I think, for our communities, including homelessness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. That completes the questioning of members, and I thank the panel. I'd like to make a couple observations. First, on the issue of diversity in the judiciary, we have, for
yes, Senator.
those who want to read them. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Lopez, I appreciate your work on human trafficking. I was so disappointed looking at your sentencing record that you would go light on those criminals. Those of us who work in the human trafficking, child abuse areas, it is so disheartening to see judges who practice leniency on these criminals. Ms. Campbell, it's nice to meet you. You and I have never met, and Senator Welch, said the White House said we had interviewed her. We've never met, and no, we did not interview her, so we may want to correct the White House record on that. Ms. Campbell, have you ever been a judge?
No, Senator.
Do you mind using your microphone? And so you have no experience. You have appellate law experience, but no experience as a judge.
Senator, I have argued numerous times before the court.
Okay, but you have no experience as a judge. I want to go back to the Tennessee Bar Association. When your nomination was announced, and by the way, this was a deal that was worked out before the vacancy was ever announced. We heard about it from plenty of people in Nashville, that this is exactly what was going to happen, that the deal was done. And I'm sure you're probably aware of that. Weren't you aware of that?
Senator, I was not.
Okay, the Bar Association does note your work for workers' dignity. Did you ask them to correct that, since you said you never worked for them?
I have not asked them to correct that.
Why did you not?
I wasn't aware that it said that.
Oh, so the TBA law blog is sent out, and you read it. I assume you read it. And did you note the inaccuracy? And did you ask them to correct it? Did they issue a correction? Please respond.
Senator, I do not recall reading that blog.
You don't recall reading it. So this deal was so cooked that she didn't even look at what the TBA law blog had to say when the nomination was announced. Let's go to this support for Odessa Kelly, and we've discussed that several times today. You've never been able to say why you chose to support her, and you were tagged in a Facebook post with her. So there is a reason you chose to make your largest political contribution ever to Odessa Kelly. And we have a list of tweets, Mr. Chairman, things that Odessa Kelly has said about this committee, positions that she has taken. So why would you choose to support Odessa Kelly when you knew what her opinions were? Because when people say things like that, it's not only in a tweet. We've got it on Facebook. We have it in other instances. So would you like to provide an answer on that? Senator Cruz asked you about that, and you never could say why you supported her. Do you align with her politically? Do you agree with her? Do you think that we are aligned with the devil? What would cause you to be right out there with your best political support and contribution for her?
Senator, as I said, I'm not familiar with those statements. I do not support.
So you never heard her indicate anything. What did you think you were supporting? What kind of agenda were you supporting when you supported her?
Senator, again, I'm not familiar with those particular statements.
You have to have, every candidate has a political ideology. Why would you give that support for someone who has made such statements? And let me ask you, go back to the workers' dignity, that work that you've done. Do you agree with them on abolishing law enforcement, abolishing ICE?
Senator, I'm not familiar with those statements, but I can categorically say to you that I disagree with those positions.
So you would not abolish ICE. Okay. The Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, and we have discussed this, and you're saying, I want you to say this for the record. So you are saying that they are lying when they say that you gave them advice and consent and help. Is that correct?
Senator, the manifesto that was referenced, I am not familiar with it.
So why would they think that they had depended on you for advice? And why would they note this? Did you ask them about it? Did you say, why are you referencing me and I had nothing to do with this? Did you talk to anyone?
Senator, until today, I did not know that my name was listed in one of their publications.
You had no idea about that. Well, do you agree with them? And I'm pulling this from a Fox 17 news report. TIRRC is calling on Metro Police to develop clear policies and refuse to help ICE carry out civil immigration enforcement in Davidson County. Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that statement, and no, I don't agree with it.
You don't agree. Thank you.
Blackburn, we'll give you a moment to compose yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Judge Kidd, I want to ask you about U.S. versus Rodriguez-Sanchez. You remember that case?
Senator, the name does not ring a bell, but perhaps
Okay.
the facts might.
All right, this was an illegal immigrant from Mexico, and you ordered him released from federal custody pending trial. And he had quite a criminal history. He had a series of charges, including resisting an officer with violence, 2 charges of domestic violence. He was deported by ICE in 2011, and then at some point, he illegally re-entered the country. Now, in deciding to release this illegal alien, you essentially determined that under the Bail Reform Act, he did not pose a danger to the community. Do you think that crimes of domestic violence are serious enough to impose a danger to the community?
To answer that question, Senator, yes, and I don't recall that specific case, but if this were an illegal reentry case, I would note that it's pretty rare that release is granted in those cases, so I imagine I also would have
Okay.
placed him on house arrest or
Well,
with
he
GPS
was
monitoring.
on an ICE detainer when you decided to release him. And another consideration for deciding whether to release a criminal defendant pending trial is if they pose a flight risk. And how could you possibly argue that an illegal alien with a criminal record was, and they were going to be deported by ICE, that they were not a flight risk?
Senator, in those cases, the question is whether there are any conditions that I could impose that would mitigate any risk of flight. And again, I don't recall that specific one, but generally, if it's...
Would you like to review that and then submit an answer to me in your questions? Because to me, when we're looking at crime that is committed by illegal entrants into this country, this is something that is of tremendous concern to me. Another one that is of concern to me is the article, and Senator Lee mentioned the article to you that deals with child rape laws. And I've done a lot of work working on children that are being trafficked. And the chairman's done a lot of work dealing with child sexual abuse and exploitative material. But the fact that you were listed as having had conversations that shaped an article about capital child rape laws is of concern to me. One of your statements, and I'm going to quote you on this, is that capital child rape statutes are formed at the nexus of three movements: the popular movement to shame, fear, and isolate sex offenders, the feminist movement for harsher punishment of sexual and intrafamilial violence, and the legal and political movement to punish attacks against vulnerable victims with death. So there's a lot in that. So do you think there is currently a popular movement to shame, fear, and isolate sex offenders?
Senator, that was not my statement.
That was not your statement. It's an article you contributed to, and that is the author stating, and I'm quoting that. That was it. So do you agree with that? Do you think that there is a popular movement to shame, to fear, to isolate sex offenders? Do you think sex offenders are criminals? Or do you see them as victims? Do you think that there is a feminist movement that is pushing for harsher penalties and punishments of sexual and intrafamilial violence?
Senator, as a former prosecutor, I prosecuted many cases involving sex offenses, and I believe that those offenses and those people who commit them should be punished.
Let me ask you this. Do you think it's wrong for the article to advocate for harsher punishments for sexual and intrafamilial incest violence?
Do I think that it's wrong to advocate for harsher punishment? Senator, as to the particular policy considerations, I would leave to this body. But again, as a former prosecutor, I did seek significant punishments for those who engaged in those offenses.
Okay, why don't you pull your records and let us know how many conversations you had with the author that shaped the contents of the article. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would you like to clarify that, Judge Kidd? Because I understand your name was mentioned in a footnote to an article which you did in before the Supreme Court.
It was, and I want to be clear, I was not the person, arguing the case, but I was at counsel table that day.
Thank you. Now recognize senators for 5 minutes of questioning. The first senator is Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ritz, I will tell you, I have been so disappointed as things have come through. Senator Haggerty and I gave you the benefit of the doubt for the U.S. Attorney, but we have heard from so many people in West Tennessee of their frustration with you. So when you look at this, how can criminal defendants that come before you as a judge think you're going to give them a fair shake? How can attorneys that expect their clients to be treated fairly in the courtroom expect that you're going to behave ethically and not discredit them, not discredit the attorneys?
Senator, in my career, 19 years, the only job I've had as a lawyer is to represent the interests of the United States and keep people safe in our state.
How about the people of Tennessee?
And we represent the people.
Because that should be a priority too. You referenced the previous allegation against you. The court never addressed that because the attorney withdrew from the case. Okay, let me ask you this. You hired a number two, Reagan Taylor Fondren, who received a year of probation for prosecutorial misconduct, including unconstitutionally burying evidence and misleading the court. Why did you hire her, and what was the follow-on with that?
Senator, our first assistant United States attorney, I did not hire Ms. Fondren. She has been a dedicated public servant her whole career. I promoted her to be first assistant. As with all of my AUSAs, I am proud of the work that they do to uphold the rule of law and protect people.
Let's talk about the people of West Tennessee, because your primary duty as a U.S. attorney is to keep the people of West Tennessee safe. Memphis is more dangerous under your leadership, and it's a direct result of your lax policies of not prosecuting violent crime. We know about the Lobley case, and we know that he had been charged with 4 felonies, including unlawful possession. So the Shelby County DA has publicly stated that the Lobley case was accepted for federal prosecution. Is that accurate?
Senator,
Yes or no?
9 days before the tragic killing of Officer
Yes or no?
McKinney, our office did accept that for potential federal prosecution. We were
Okay.
diligently investigating that case.
Let's talk about this. The prior U.S. attorney brought 100% of prosecutable gun cases. If you weren't in charge, Mr. Lobley would have been behind bars.
I want to say, Senator, if I may, I have no control over the state system. Mr. Lobley had been arrested in the state system and released on bond in the
Federal
state.
charges.
He was arrested.
Federal charges. You and the DA have a difference of opinion on this.
No.
Because he says he was accepted for federal prosecution.
And referenced
So-
for our consideration, but we had not yet charged Mr. Lobley, Senator.
Okay, so you were not moving at the pace of your predecessor. Let me move on to sex offenders. Because in May of last year, you stated, and I quote, "Most convicted sex offenders who live and work in West Tennessee are productive members of the community." What would you say to the families whose children's lives have been ruined by sexual exploitation and abuse? And how do you think that they feel knowing that the chief law enforcement officer, their chief federal law enforcement officer, believes that these sex abusers are productive members of the community?
Senator, I don't believe I said that.
I'll
there may
provide
be,
you with the quote.
I'd be happy to respond in writing,
Yes.
but I can tell you, Senator, we have an
You
active...
made that quote. Let me move on because if you'll respond in writing, I wanted to raise the issue we talked about previously, which is you removed the Tennessee flag from the U.S. Attorney's office after you were sworn in. And we have heard from several people that you did this. So I want to know, you told me it was because you thought the office was cluttered that you removed the flag. But you were there for the people of West Tennessee. You removed the Tennessee flag. So what did you do with it? Did you throw it in the trash? Did you put it in the closet? Why did you not see your appointment as having a duty to the people of West Tennessee?
As Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer, Senator, I represent the United States and the Department of Justice. And we're talking about the conference room where we give press conferences and similar public statements. And I felt it was fundamentally...
Mr. Ritz, that doesn't fly. Mr. Chairman, I've got the sex abuse quote. I'll submit it for the record. Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Ritz, you've been asked several questions but not given the chance to answer them. Would you like to respond to any of the questions raised by the senator?
I think, I can't remember which one I was not able to answer. At this time, I'm happy to move on.
All right. Senator Butler?
Thank you so much, Mr. Ritz, and congratulations
Thank
to
you, Senator.
for being nominated and appreciating your family and supporters. I know it takes all of us to make sure that we get to, that you have the opportunity to get to the...
Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Judge, welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. I want to talk to you about your relationship with demand justice. And during your last confirmation process before this committee, you said in response to a question for the record that you've spoken with Demand Justice's co-founder, Chris King, and I'm quoting you, a couple of times about the judicial nominations process, end quote. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. I've looked at the positions that Demand Justice has taken, and one of their priorities has been to expand the Supreme Court. So did you speak with Mr. King about expanding the Supreme Court?
No, Senator Blackburn. My conversations with Mr. King were limited to getting advice and guidance on how the nomination process worked. It was quite opaque to me at that point, and so he provided
All right.
guidance.
Do you support increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court?
That is a matter that I am precluded from opining on under the canons. But I think if you look at my record, I've never taken that position.
I don't think you're precluded on giving an opinion as to whether or not you think that the Supreme Court should be expanded. And Demand Justice has suggested that adding 4 justices would bring, and I quote them, restore balance and integrity. So do you think that there's a particular number of justices that should be added to the Supreme Court?
Senator Blackburn, I have never taken any position on this. I don't think it's appropriate for me to opine on it.
Okay, Demand Justice claims that the Supreme Court is, and I'm quoting them, unethical, unaccountable, and out of control. Do you share that assessment?
Senator, I don't have a relationship with Demand Justice. I've only spoken to Mr. King on a couple occasions several years ago. I'm not familiar with their positions, but I don't associate myself with those.
Obviously, you respected him, or you wouldn't have called him and gotten advice from him. So that is what concerns me, that you would go to a far left-leaning group to get advice on how to come before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Kennedy talked with you about your ranking, and you are, as he told you, number 1 at having the biggest backlog in the 7th Circuit, and you're number 7 nationwide with outstanding motions. And the thing, as I looked at this, Judge, what is very curious to me is how you're so out of step with the other district judges as far as managing your time and moving cases forward and actually making decisions. I looked at the alarm detection systems case, and you've had a fully briefed motion since September of 22. And then the Palladino Wells Fargo case you've had since November of 22. So I understand how time-consuming the work is. I understand, and let me tell you, we do a lot of reading. We do a lot of prep work for our hearings. But I find it interesting that when you have a fully briefed case in front of you, you cannot come to a decision. So what hinders you from being able to arrive at decisions when you have everything you need to make the decision?
Thank you, Senator. I wouldn't say that I'm hindered in my decision-making. In fact, if you look at my record, I am a fan of ruling on the record. And so I've done decided many motions on the record at hearings over the course of several hours. So I'm not hindered.
District Judge, let's talk about that, because I went in and looked at your record, and I noted the fact that you've only presided over 1 civil trial to verdict in your nearly 2 years on the bench. 1 trial, just 1. And that, combined with the fact that you had tried only 3 cases when you were in private practice, leads me to question your fitness for the court. So how can you expect us to confirm you to the circuit court when in 2 years you've presided over 1 civil trial and your backlog is larger than nearly everyone else? What would qualify you?
Senator, I would look at the quality of my decision-making.
Other judges find a way to do expediency and quality of work. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I believe Senator Lee is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Judge Maldonado, for being here. When we look at the work of
SFI. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you. Mr. Alley, I understand that you have disavowed the defund the police movement.
Senator, I've made clear that I've never taken that position, and I wouldn't for any number
Even
of
though
reasons.
the senator did. Let me ask you about, I know you live in D.C., and so crime in D.C. The D.C. City Council has cut the police budget by $15 million. The resources for D.C. police were decimated, and crime is out of control. Yet we've seen a former Trump administration official that was murdered and carjackings. So do you agree with what the D.C. City Council is doing to defund the police?
Senator, as I've made clear, I've never taken the position of defunding the police, nor would I. And I've worked closely with law enforcement precisely because I care, in addition to accountability, about public safety very deeply, including in the district.
Thank you for that. I do want to talk with you about some of the clients that you've represented. I do a lot on protecting women and children, and you have filed a number of briefs in federal court representing rapists, terrorists, and child sexual abusers. And every criminal defendant deserves adequate representation. We talk about that here in this committee, and I want to be sure to get you on the record about your involvement in some of these cases involving child sexual abuse material. The chairman has done a good bit of work on that. We recently had a nominee come before us, Seth Aframe, who refused to follow sentencing guidelines in a horrific child pornography case, and the guidelines were for a life sentence, but he sought 60 years. So given your previous work representing the interest of criminals with child sexual abuse, I want to get you on the record. Is there ever a scenario in which you would deviate from the sentencing guideline recommendations of life imprisonment for a crime involving the sexual abuse of a child?
Senator, if I could just say at the outset, I have represented multiple victims of violence. I have represented, the center has represented numerous people who were victims of child abuse and child sexual abuse. And so I have seen firsthand how devastating that can be to families.
So let me ask you about Hire versus the Bureau of Prisons. You recall that?
I'm not familiar with that
Well,
one.
the MacArthur Center filed an amicus brief on behalf of a criminal defendant who was previously convicted of unconscionable conduct, abducting a 10-year-old boy at knife point, raping him, burying him alive. It's horrifying. And the defendant also admitted to molesting more than 40 children. Think about that. So it is my understanding that when this amicus brief was filed in 2019, you were overseeing the center's DC office. In fact, you've been an integral part of the center's work for many years. So are you comfortable with the center's representation of a defendant who committed these heinous acts?
So, Senator, let me just say at the outset that the center has represented a number of people who are victims of child sexual abuse and horrific.
This is a child
crime.
molester.
Yes, and
this is a child abuser that the center filed an amicus brief on behalf.
I was just acknowledging the kind of seeing firsthand how devastating that can be. I think it's important at the outset of discussing any of these sorts of issues. I'm not familiar with the matter you referred to. I was the director of the DC office. I wasn't the director of the entire organization or overseeing all of the amicus briefs. So I'm not familiar with that particular case. I'd be happy to look into it and understand the context. I can tell you, though, Senator, that when we file an amicus brief in a case, it is not about the specific tragic fact. It's about a broader principle of law that is applicable beyond that particular case.
Thank you. I want to move on. Judge DuBose, I want to come to you. I know that there's been discussion about you saying that using the I was in a Marxist phase. and an explanation for that. Do you understand why that causes us pause?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And yes, it does. And I have to say, when I was given a copy of that article yesterday, I was shocked. I had no idea. When I read the article, I couldn't understand the context. If you had that opportunity to read it, there were some things that were placed in quotes. There were some points where the student was writing about herself. So I, as I sit here today, don't even recall having that.
As you sit here today, will you right now disavow the basic tenets of Marxism?
As I mentioned, Senator, I am not, nor I've ever been.
No.
I am not a Marxist. I do not espouse Marxist theory or ideology. I never have. I never will. I'm a very proud Democrat here and part of a Democrat. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Booker?
I'm a passer.
Senator Padilla? Senator Ossoff?
Given what we have going on the floor, Mr. Chairman, I'll submit some questions for the record. Thank you.
Senator Butler?
The same, Chair. There's a number of things happening, and I pass and will submit questions to the nominees later.
Senator Welch?
I pass as well.